Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining us for this session. My name is Nick Beecroft. I will offer a few brief remarks just to set the context, and then I'll hand over to our esteemed panelists that we are joined by today. So since February of 2022, Russian cyber operations against Ukraine have taken the form of continuous, relentless espionage operations, use of destructive wipers against a very wide target set, and also state-aligned hacktivist activity deploying DDoS operations really against any part of the Ukrainian economy that they can access. According to our own threat intelligence at BAE, as well as public reporting from Microsoft and Google, the scale of attacks confronting Ukraine is really unprecedented. According to the Google Threat Analysis Group, earlier this year, Russia increased its targeting of users in Ukraine by 250% in 2022 compared to 2020. Destructive cyber operations against Ukraine in the first 4 months of 2022, according to Mandiant, were greater in volume than in the previous 8 years combined. So Ukraine is the first country in history that has had to confront full-scale cyber aggression against its national cyberspace by a highly capable threat actor. And the defensive effort that has been marshaled to defend Ukrainian cyberspace has involved a great deal of innovation, bringing together government, military, and the private sector to mount a defense in depth. That private sector activity has been particularly innovative, involving initiatives such as the recruitment of private citizens with cyber skills into the so-called IT army of Ukraine, as well as a very substantial effort from private sector cybersecurity companies in Ukraine, as well as Europe and the US, who have provided services at scale to achieve resilience across Ukrainian cyberspace. So with that, we will get into the topic of our discussion, where we're seeking to identify the key lessons that are emerging from the cyber operations in this war. I will turn first to General Poti in Kyiv. General Poti, so we would welcome your initial comments on what are the main lessons in your assessment that have emerged from the first year or so of the war.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm very grateful for invite me on this conference, and I very pleasure to see my good friend Karl Malenda and Robert Koshla. We very often have different meetings online and not only online about this problem. So 5 minutes about learned lessons. I sharing cyber war in Ukraine, and not only Ukraine, on all of the world. I share my small presentation. You can see good, yes?
Yes, we can see, yeah.
Yes. So let's start. Some backgrounds about Russia, how Russia used to conduct cyber attacks even before the invasion in February 24th last year. It's clear that the enemy cyber attack supports their conventional military operation. We can clearly see the direct connection between cyber attack, conventional operation, and, very important, info psyops, which in a nutshell is what hybrid warfare is all about. That's exactly the type of war that the Russian Federation waged against us. Here are some facts to illustrate this hybrid nature. You can see this plan, timeline, and very famous timeline. In January 14th, Russians attacked the Kaufman information resource. Then in February, they attacked Viasat, which also caused negative consequences to our country, but not only our country. We have a negative consequences in other European Union countries. While right now we can all observe the continuous attacks on our civilian infrastructure sites. It's important to mention that Russia's state propaganda uses shelling and kamikaze drone attacks on our critical energy infrastructure, oil and gas infrastructure, telecom infrastructure, to hide the fact of the attack in the disseminating lies about so-called poor management by the Ukrainian government. But their lies fall, and here are some statistics. Russia continues to behave in cyberspace as a terrorist state, with its focus on our civilian infrastructure. The CERTUA, our national response team, task identified and analyzed 2,194 cyber incidents and cyber attack in calendar year 2022. And majority of them targeted national and local authorities, as well energy, telco, logistic, and other civilian sectors. Very important. Only 50% targets were military. 85% targets were only civilian infrastructure and government resources. Currently, we are monitoring and tracing more than 80 hacker groups, mostly from Russia. Our response team, CERTUA, and other Ukrainian cybersecurity agencies started accumulating this data from 2013. And we believe that we really know our enemy and are ready to share this knowledge and understanding with our partners and allies. This pie chart demonstrates the activities of such hackers groups, which we managed to attribute all the way to the preparators in these attacks. We will continue to conduct in-depth, detailed analytic of their activities, but even now this color-coded monthly breakdown of their attacks allow us to see that the enemy was very active at the start of the invasion. Then there was a slowdown before the summer offensive. Also, you can see that the enemy increased their attacks at the end of 2022. In this year, the first half of this year, we can see analog trends when we analyze trends during the last year. You can find more details from our study, details about cyber attacks in our published public published report, Russian Cyber Attacks, Lesson Learned 2022. This report we can see and upload for website SSIP. The main stakeholders of Russia state cyber attacks are GRU, SVR, and FSB. This slide will present a list of hacker groups affiliated with these key terrorist state actors. We observe an increasing defect in manpower involved in conducting the cyber attacks, which confirms the efficiency of sanctions imposed by the international community on Russia, causing the brain drain of highly qualified IT staff who are trying to avoid criminal prosecution for war crimes and save the skin from mobilization. Dear colleagues, today very important economical and political sanction from your country for prosecution this terrorist group and this government institution from Russian Federation. This is a more effective way to defend against this cyber attack, a cyber incident. And very grateful for your support and for effective improve economical and political sanction against for these groups. Our continuous analysis of the Russian hacker groups allowed us to identify following goals of these hackers, which is a combination of terror against civilians and attacks on our information, energy, and military infrastructure. On this slide, we can see main goals of Russian hackers, 5 main goals, and these goals today actually 2. A word of caution, our enemy is treacherous and tricky. That's why we should never underestimate them. They constantly shift the focus of the attacks and their targets, taking into account the political environment in Ukraine, your countries, and their own domestic political agenda. We believe that the enemy increased their cyber attacks on Poland and other partners who help Ukraine the most to try and disrupt their help. My colleague from Polish will confirm that Russia increased the spectrum and number of their attacks and psyops against Poland in recent months in 2023 and another country, I personally strongly believe that this illustration of Russians' plan to disrupt and reduce Poland's help to Ukraine and another country. Unfortunately, the aggressive activities of the enemy affect our closest allies and partners already. Some of the most common intrusion techniques used 2022. The hackers group keep designing and using new tactics and techniques. That is why together we should be ready to counter the aggression of the Russian Federation, update our security system, and combine our efforts at the strategic, organizational, and technical levels of the cybersecurity front. Which brings me to the second, So this is very shortly introduce about our discussion during this panel section, and the most important lesson learned during the cyber war against Ukraine. But very important, cyber war not have a geographical border. Cyber war today, Russian Federation relies cyber attack and cyber threat not only against Ukraine, but unfortunately against another country and from Europe Union and another world. Thank you very much.
General Poti, thank you for that very rich briefing. I'm sure we'll return to some of the themes that you've raised. I wonder if I might turn to General Melenda next, please, sir, for your initial impressions of the key lessons emerging from Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. It is great to be back here. So see lots of friends over. A few thoughts about what was said already. I believe we have a brief from the first line on defense in cyberspace. So thank you, Alexander, for that. What I would like to highlight is that we are in a very close contact and cooperation with our Ukrainian friends and trying our best to support them and also take all those lessons and implement that in our structures. So, you know, it's like we are fascinated by the dynamic digitalization of the world and opportunities offered by constantly developing cyberspace. However, under facade of comfort and convenience, there are many threats, not only for the country, but also the users, yes? So we are trying to take those lessons and implement in our infrastructure, in our teams, or in our, skill set. And I believe a few points that in this rapid changing world, time is of the essence. And I believe it is imperative that we move quickly, seizing opportunities and overcoming obstacles with urgency. So we should be able to conduct operations without any delays. And of course, there are some risks connected with that. The one is that somebody is to take the risk. So no guts, no glory. So we embrace challenges with courage and take this calculated risk because no achievements are to have like remarkable achievements require this requires courage, and sometimes especially in military it's not so obvious. You know, we have like our procedures, we have all our directives, and we go like step by step. In this rapid changing environment, it is not the case. So we should have like teams with open minds and be ready to involve or to engage depending on the circumstances. So this is one thing. I had the pleasure to have like very great discussion yesterday during the civics exercise with the Deputy Minister of Ukraine, Vitaly Deinega, and he addressed something that struck me, and I would like to highlight that, to have a like bigger picture, because we see like cyber operations, adversaries targeting infrastructure, and this is one side of the coin. However, we should also focus about the communication. And he said, you know, during the peacetime, we all have a very top level requirements for cybersecurity. Sometimes we need to find the balance between functionality and security. And he said that, you know, during peacetime, if there is a breach and a sensitive information leakage, there will be lots of discussions in country, but nobody is to be killed. During wartime, when the information is not sent to the soldiers on the front line, they will be killed. So now we should find the balance in our solutions, in our communications, in our equipment, that not to let security to kill functionality of that. So I believe this is for me as a counterintelligence officer, it was something unique to hear that. However, I fully understand him now that that's his biggest challenge, because we are preparing our solutions during the peacetime, and we test them during the peacetime, and it works great during exercises, but not so during the wartime. So I believe that this is one of the remarks that we should figure out about and have a discussion in Poland as well, but also in NATO, how to address that, how to take those lessons and put in our standard operation procedures. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. So I know the point you've just raised there is one that is being discussed very actively in other places, in other discussions that I'm aware of as well. I wonder if we could turn now to General Kashuba, please, at NATO. Sir, your thoughts.
So good morning to all of you. It's welcome from NATO HQ in Brussels. So it's my pleasure and honor to participate in today's panel, and I would like to address some expertise and vantage points on the topic. So first of all, I would like to mention that this are exceptional time where Russia aggression's action in Ukraine required unprecedented level of coherence and security in communication and information systems throughout the NATO enterprise. And its cybersecurity posture also required the quick reaction to hostile activities at cyberspace. Since the beginning, the office was established. We are relatively a new office, 2 years in place, and we are responsible for the IT coherence and the cybersecurity part of the house in NATO. The office as the single point of authority for the cybersecurity and the risk owner for the NATO enterprise owned operated networks, we are strongly focusing what is going on in Ukraine. Throughout the time, we gathered a lot of lessons identified, which we transferred into the lesson learned. And I would like now to present you some of our lesson learned, which we achieved during that period of time. It is well known that actually the peacetime crisis and conflict are more difficult to distinguish in the cyberspace. Cyber attacks and malicious cyber activities against Ukraine represented Russian full-scale invasion in 2022, including throughout the prepositioning of access to Ukrainian networks to facilitate attacks when kinetic operations were launched. By that, I would like to point it out that the cyberspace is contested at all times, not just during the crisis. The next point which I would like to bring to your attention is that cyber effects can be spread beyond the theater of the kinetic conflict. The war demonstrates the interconnectedness of the cyberspace. For instance, the malicious cyber operation targeting the VSATs in 2022 February not only impacted Ukrainian colleagues, but also alliance, which disrupting the communication and the critical infrastructure across those countries. In preparation for and following the full-scale invasion, Russia threat actors have launched cyber operation against nations at eastern flank NATO as well. It means Poland is one of them. So Russia threat actors have increasingly high risk threshold in their malicious cyber activities against entire alliance colleagues. I would like to also point out the integration of the cyberspace into the all aspect of multi-domain operation is not completed in NATO. And we, as a NATO countries, as a NATO per se, we need to work with that harder. Currently, what we are doing in NATO, we are introducing the cyber adaptation roadmap with the thousands of actions which needs to be reached by the respective NATO enterprise entities, as well suggested to the countries to bring us on the better level of security and deterrence. Also, the second effort, which is currently ongoing in NATO, there's a digital transformation effort which is aiming to improve that posture as well. This is not secret. This is well known that activist groups can and do regularly become the part of the toolbox of adversaries in the cyber warfare. And we, NATO, we are facing those issues daily, trying to find the best solution and at least mitigate them from the daily activities. We are aware that the cybersecurity at large is so complex and challenging. To face it, we must to obtain the persistent foothold on the target networks required from us as a NATO countries, long-term preparation and joint effort, which are the precondition to our success and protect our networks. The last but not least, I would like to also mention the cyber lesson learned from Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine needs to be put in the broader context of increasingly complex cyber threat landscape. For instance, we are also focusing on the Chinese cyber operation, which are pointed on NATO networks as well. So that's why we need to think not only about the Russia, and we, at least at NATO, we are thinking also about the China, who cooperate with Russian activists as well. So this is the lesson learned, which I would like to present it to you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, General. I wonder if I might turn now to Monika Kaminska. The academic and research community has been very active in trying to understand how Russia has sought to exploit cyberspace as part of the war, and I'd be interested if you could give us some reflections from that perspective.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. And thank you very much for having me here. It's wonderful to be here in Katowice. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about the lessons learned from Ukraine, and then I'll move on to speculating a little bit about the future of Russian cyber operations, always a risky exercise. First of all, there's no doubt that Russia expected a quick victory in this conflict, in this war, but it was met flat-footed when it was met with strong Ukrainian resistance as the war unfolded. And I think we can see a similar sort of dynamic playing out also in cyber operations. So we see that Russia's technical sophistication in its cyber operations decreased as the war continued. Likely a lot of the, even some of the more sophisticated malware was rushed out before achieving operational maturity. A good example of this is the Indestroyer 2 operation, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. This was arguably the most technically sophisticated operation that at least we have seen as researchers during the war. Yet, despite this technical sophistication, important parts of the malware were only minimally obfuscated, and the malware itself only had weak abilities to evade defensive mechanisms, which is quite telling. And then, of course, there have been the wiper operations, right, which have been particularly popular during this war. Because of how destructive they are, wiper operations are, of course, highly visible. Russia's willingness to burn these capabilities early on also seems to indicate a lack of foresight as to just how long this war would last. Russia continues to use wiper operations very prolifically to this day. And that's also interesting to me because that indicates a long-term shift to what we might call low-equity operations. And again, given that this war has lasted much longer than we expected, that Russia expected rather, these more lightweight tools have proven particularly useful to Russia. They can be easily modified, easily adapted to different targets. They can also be adapted after they've been used, which means that even when defenders develop detections for the initial versions of the malware, subsequent versions are not so easily discovered. In terms of the future of Russian operations, I think both in Ukraine and beyond, Russia will continue to use cyber operations in a creative way that disorients competitors' responses. I mean, Ukraine has been an enormous example, an incredible example of how to mount a successful cyber defense. Ukraine was incredibly well prepared, as it turned out. I'm not so confident that other countries would be. We've seen in the past how Russian operations confound particularly Western states. A lot of my own research has been on the difficulty that Western states experience in responding to offensive cyber operations. So we saw, for example, how the Viasat hack, which used the acid rain wiper, is an example of this difficulty of response. So it spilled outside of Ukraine and affected renewable energy infrastructure in Germany. And there was practically no response other than attribution and condemnation, right? There were no sanctions. It's confusing. It's very difficult to respond to these kinds of operations. I'm not being critical here. I'm saying that actually the operations are such that because they have unintended effects, because the intent of the operation is very difficult to determine, it's very, very difficult to respond to it. And this response problem has come up time and again with regards to Russian cyber operations. We all remember NotPetya. The response came 7 months after the operation itself. We simply find it very difficult to apply penalties in response to cyber operations, not just Russian ones, but we find it difficult to apply penalties that would change the calculus of the adversary. And as I said, much of this is intentional from the perspective of the adversary. They introduce strategic ambiguity, they introduce confusion, particularly to create the difficulty, as I said, of establishing this intent and measuring the impact of these operations. And that is the particular attraction that I think cyber operations have for states like Russia. So I think in general, we can expect operations that continually push the boundaries of what would be considered to fall below the threshold of use of force, and operations that might evade a strong response. Having said all of this, currently, of course, Russia is bogged down in a protracted war. And while I don't think cyber operators are sitting on their hands, I think they're probably much more preoccupied with continually redeveloping these more flexible tools, these wiper tools, as I mentioned, and continuing with their so far largely, we could say, unsuccessful information operations, and also conducting espionage operations that would support the war effort. Importantly, I don't think that cyber operations in the near future will just generate any sort of escalation dynamics. Even the GRU, which has traditionally been very risk acceptant in its cyber operations, we see at least from what's available in the public domain, we see them being a lot more cautious in the midst of this war now, in avoiding, I think, possible escalation with NATO countries, possibly since Viasat, possibly some lessons learned there. It's generally moved away from using malware that might have unintended consequences, so self-spreading malware, although hermetic wiper in this case is an exception. So I'll end on this slightly more optimistic note and welcome any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Finally, I'll turn to Robert Koshler from Microsoft. Microsoft clearly has been very active as a participant in defending Ukrainian cyberspace, so welcome your insights, please.
Thank you very much. A lot of things has been already said, so it's difficult right now to fill the gap in the information that's been shared. I would like to refer to General Poti presentation and introduction of the landscape of the operations performed last year, and the way how Ukraine defended against Ukrainian offensive operations. Of course, and it was said already, Ukraine was very well prepared. So the preparation did not start last year. It was long-term investment. There was lesson learned as well from the attacks performed by Russia, especially starting, of course, since 2014 after Maidan. So we observed very offensive operations against Ukraine, especially on energy sector. And General Poti, as a professor of Kharkiv University, was engaged directly in the development of lessons learned also on the black energy operations against Ukraine in 2014, 15, 16. What I would like to stress, of course, this type of resilience, because we need to talk about resilience, this type of resilience is built because of great cooperation with industry. So some conclusions that are presented by SSSCIP. This is the great cooperation model with industry, so leverage information that is shared by industry with the governments and military forces. So I think it was also stressed by NATO quite recently that declarative cooperation with industry that been presented for a long time by NATO and the European Union, it was very visible, the results and how it can impact the national capabilities to respond to really offensive attacks in cyberspace. Of course, it's not only the cyberspace, it's about hybrid types of attacks, also mentioned by General Poti. So what General Kochuba mentioned about cyber threat intelligence, that's what NATO is using for a long time. And Microsoft initiated in 2003, the government security program, where we share cyber threat intelligence. This is free of charge type of collaboration. Ukraine joined this program in 2015. So I remember because I had the chance, I had the great honor actually to host the Ukrainian delegation at the time to Washington and to start this operational collaboration with Ukraine. So this type of collaboration with civilian and military structures results right now with increased situation awareness. If you can leverage of the global observations by the global players like Microsoft, having the global infrastructure, providing cloud services, this is something that give you additional, I may say, advantage on the attackers, because first, we are capable to analyze their methods of attacks. Of course, they are not secret anymore. We have a Maitri attack tool disclosing all the techniques, tactics, and procedures used by those attackers. So, of course, we may say that Russians are not effective anymore. I think we are more capable to observe what they are doing. It's not so easy, and it's really requires a lot of investment on the attacker side to develop the new methods of attacks and also discover the vulnerabilities that can be exploited, like 0 days. So, of course, from this perspective, building this common capability and collaboration with between industry and military, it's about cyber threat intelligence, but also it's about visual intelligence. So that's what we've seen about collaboration by civilian companies providing intelligence, the visual intelligence, satellite intelligence with the armed forces. This is, I think, if you can build your situation awareness, if you can increase your situation awareness, you can increase your efficiency. Plus, I think what was quite important to recognize Ukrainian investment in new technologies. So we could observe Ukraine adopted the act on the cloud technologies implementation. It was just before the full-scale campaign started by Russia at the end of February. Then it was followed by the decree of the Council of Ministers of Ukraine, introducing the models that are more resilient, models based on the cloud. Also introducing the models that allowed government to replicate and store data of the national, the most critical registries, also outside of physical boundaries of the country. That, I think, there was a game changer for the first time, and many countries just started to look at it, and we talk about it also with critical infrastructure operators. They think about hybrid model of operations, not being fully dependent only on the fixed data centers, but also thinking about mobile data centers. What we could observe, of course, in some investment in the US, implementing modular data centers in the past. But right now, it's also seen as a trend for the civilian organization and critical operators to invest in modern technologies. And finally, I think it's quite important to address the challenges and the way how we can defend against new methods of attacks. That's, of course, artificial intelligence. This is what the game changer right now. Of course, this is dual use technology, so it can be used for offensive, but it can be also used for defensive activities. So being capable with the small resources by the Security Operations Center or CSERT team to use the tool that will correlate a huge amount of signals coming from external sources like industry, internal sources like special forces on civilian side and also military side. So having these capabilities, if you can correlate, if you can eliminate false positives, efficiency even of the small team increase heavily. And I think this is the game changer for the future, and we'll see it more and more.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to all of our panelists for the richness of the insights you've provided. I feel that we need a separate conference to do justice to the depth of insight that you've all provided. Sadly, we have 8 minutes, so I will try to cover the really key points. I think what has come across really clearly from all of you is the need for innovation and the need for collaborating across different partnerships to achieve cyber defense at national scale. I wonder if I could raise the point about thinking about the next year, what are the innovations that are most important? What are the capabilities that should be prioritized in order to build on the gains that have already been achieved? So what are those key innovations, the key capabilities to develop, to prioritize? I wonder if I could turn to General Poti for your thoughts on that one first, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for good ideas and conclusion which made panelists. Very right conclusion, and about key factor for success of building cybersecurity protection and cybersecurity resilience. In my opinion, today very important, very close cooperation between public and private sector. Assistance provided by private companies was a key factor that helped ensure our cyber resilience in Ukraine today when confronting Russia aggression. Those included some example. For example, Google Median, Cisco Talos Intelligence Group, Recorded Future, Unit 42, Akamai Technologies, and other partners who work together with our CERT-UA, National Response Team, and our state cyber protection centers. Specifically, these troops and this division in Ukraine responsible for vulnerability detection, responsible for cyber response cyber incident, and building network of endpoint detection and analysis, network traffic analysis. Another example, ASET, antivirus software cooperation in cyber threat response. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, that have offered us their cloud infrastructure for the temporary migration of critical registry, critical data to the cloud. A good example tell us Robert Koshla. And another example, Cloudflare incorporation. We help Ukraine for protection IP addresses and electronic resources in Ukraine. Cooperation with a number of Ukrainian companies, ICCP, SOC Prime, and other companies that help us proactively defend ourselves from the cyber threats. Cooperation with a big company, EPAM. This company help us digitalization our public resource. So this example, given all that role of private sector in business and addressing cyber threats and ensuring the resilience keeps growing. Government needs today to take that into account and include the private sector in the overall cybersecurity ecosystem. Only together with the private sector can we ensure resilience for the entire company in the national information infrastructure. Concerning this above this idea, various cooperation mechanisms are possible between the government and business, such as contracting, outsourcing, and during the crisis time, very important instrument, reserving specialists. Exemption from mobilization to the armed force, for example, As for the later, specialists will be designated to address the issue within their respective competence during the martial law, which means the government must guarantee appropriate social protection for this period. And many specialists from private sector in Ukraine will be mobilized in armed force, in SSIP, another subject of cybersecurity, for the division of cybersecurity, cyber defense, cyber offensive, and cyber protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Poti. General Melender, I wonder if I might pass that to you. How are you, as a military commander, thinking about having to integrate private sector capabilities potentially into national cyber defense? You talked about the need for speed and for innovating in the way that you operate. Interested in your reflections on that.
Okay, so thank you. I fully agree, and I couldn't agree more with what was already said about this cooperation. And I fully agree that cybersecurity cannot be built ad hoc, so it must be a result of continuous work. And unfortunately, there will never be enough action taken to defend cyberspace. And of course, cooperation with private sector is on our list. So we see, and we even, like the government and military, change our attitude. You know, it used to be the way that everything is classified, like secret, and all our knowledge about the APTs, groups, etc., the tactic, techniques, and procedures, they were like top level. And there was like expectation, need to know, who should know that, and that's it. Now we change the perspective, so from need to know to need to share. And as an example is the report conducted by military counterintelligence service and NASC about APT group, so which was released with the tools that are already open and were used to conduct attack on the Ukrainian territory, cyberspace, but as well in Poland. So this is a kind of perspective, but it is the result of cooperation. So as I said, as we build our advantage in cyberspace on the basis of cooperation, joint actions and mutual support have never been so important. And I believe we should go that way. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are very rapidly approaching the time, but we do have time quickly to go to General Kachuba at NATO. How are you thinking at a NATO alliance level about trying to achieve collective cyber defense across the alliance? Is that a particular challenge that you face?
Yes, thank you for that question. This is quite complex. I would need to spend a few hours to discuss it, but the first thought which I can tell you, we are looking for mainly for the military and the civilian cooperation, which is reinforced by the private sector solutions. So we are constantly talking to not only across the NATO, but with alliance as well, how to make that happen and faster, because agility is the key to the success. So that's why the private sector in that sense is really vital. Why we think so? Because based on the lesson learned from Ukraine, which demonstrate the artificial intelligence, the data analytics, and point of protection software, and mainly the cloud solution are the key in the first, and they should be the first quick and win for the NATO. So, and we as a NATO, we are not working in silo. We are talking permanently to nations, and we are trying to find together how to make that happen, including the private sector who is bringing to us the skills and the best practice. Back to you.
Thank you very much, sir. And with that, unfortunately, we have to draw it to a close. I think that we've revealed many subjects that we could talk for much longer on here, but we're out of time. So I would just like to say thank you to all of our panelists, particular thanks to General Poti and Kyiv for taking the time to join us, sir. We all wish you the best of success in the coming months. And with that, I would just like to say thank you to the audience for attending, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.